Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Goel here from Peak Human Labs, and I have a very special guest with me today, Panos Papadiamantis. How are you, Panos?
Very well. Thank you for having me.
He's,
Much appreciated.
he's the product officer at PNoE, and I thought for our listeners and our viewers, it's be really interesting to learn about what this company is doing. They're like really the experts in resting metabolic rate testing and VO2 max testing, and I thought let's just go right to the source and understand why these assessments are important. Maybe before we get into the science, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Panos? Like, what's your background and why are you in this field?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for having me again. I got started in the world of breath analysis and biotech about 6 years ago when we started the company with my co-founder, Apostolos. At the time, I was an engineer working in Silicon Valley, had recently graduated from Stanford, and I was always fascinated in, dealing with complex systems. And I always thought the human body was probably the most interesting and cool one to analyze. And so my partner at the time, Apostolos, he was working on his PhD in Cambridge, UK. By the way, we've been friends since the age of 6, so
Right.
we knew each other very well. I kind of knew what he was working on. I wasn't exactly sure, but at some point we meet in Greece during summer, and he starts talking about breath analysis and how this can be something so insightful, but all of the solutions that are out there are pretty bad. And
Like,
what makes them
what were
bad,
the solutions before you guys? Like, what did that look like?
yeah,
Breath analysis. What were they doing?
what it looked like is what most people have an aversion towards, which is this big mask or even more complicated contraption, and most times that looks like a very cumbersome and time-consuming and strenuous test, which is the case with pre-existing solutions, right?
Mhm.
And the complexity and the scene of these devices is what actually earned the bad reputation for VO2 max and resting metabolic rate, which is starting to change, for a variety of reasons,
Mhm.
which we can go into that. But more or less, he saw that there's so much that you can elicit in terms of insights that can prescribe nutrition, training, recovery, but also diagnostics
Mhm.
coming from this breath analysis procedure. And he was like, okay, what if we build a better solution that is cheaper, easier, better? And that's how we started. He built the first prototype during his PhD, and then I quit my job at the time, joined him, and together we started the endeavor of not just building a device, but building a solution for breath analysis. And I highlight this term because what we offer as a company is not just a better and cheaper way of administering the test. We
Right.
also provide something that wasn't available before, which is making sense of the data. Because breath analysis is so complicated as an assessment due to the information it gathers during the test that there are scientific papers that have been written on how complex the assessment is and how you need a lot of expertise and experience in order to provide someone with all the spectrum of information that is derivable.
Mhm.
And so, as a result, over the years, we've spent a lot of time working on our analytics, providing a comprehensive report that looks into all the different areas of physiology that
Mhm.
breath analysis can assess.
Mhm.
Breath analysis is not just about VO2 max, RMR, and training zones. Breath analysis is a holistic assessment that looks into pulmonary health, cardiovascular health, circulatory health, and lastly, metabolic health.
So maybe
So,
do you mind just taking me through, I don't want to date myself. I'll just, but I have done a VO2 max, about 25 years ago, and it was done in a university setting, research setting, because
mhm,
you're right, it was very
yeah.
cumbersome. But
Mhm.
what exactly is the science? I mean, maybe before we even get there, what does it look like to the user about doing a breath analysis? Like, just, this mask is on. I wish I had the mask here
Mhm.
with me that I have in the office. I don't know if you have one,
Mhm.
but maybe just to show
Mhm.
the users. But basically the mask is monitoring your oxygen and your CO2
Hmm.
levels and
Hmm.
your heart rate. Is that correct? What are the variables?
Correct. So let's maybe dive a little bit into the science and kind of
Yeah.
understand why we're able to deliver insights in all these systems. So when you're doing a breath analysis test, you are analyzing uh, three fundamental metrics in the human breath.
Hmm.
You're analyzing oxygen concentration,
Right.
CO2 concentration, and flow volume. You need three sensors in order to provide a full-blown breath analysis assessment.
Got it.
Um, in addition to that, uh, we also, and this is also frequently conducted, you also measure heart rate. We also do real-time full spectrum heart rate variability analysis. And now, with these three fundamental breath metrics, CO2 concentration, oxygen concentration, and flow volume, you derive 23 biomarkers related to the different systems, biological systems that I mentioned earlier: heart, lungs, blood circulation, and then cells. In other words, metabolism. So think that you're taking information from these three waveforms, CO2, O2, and flow volume, and you're calculating 23 different metrics. And these 23 metrics, you bucket them in categories, and each category is providing you insight about the health of these four systems: heart, lungs, blood circulation, and cells. What are some examples of these biomarkers? VO2 max, resting metabolic rate, fat and carbohydrate oxidation, O2 pulse, which is the amount of oxygen your heart pumps into your body per heartbeat. This is an extremely important diagnostic variable for ischemic heart disease and heart failure. VO2 over breathing frequency, which is how much oxygen your lungs can absorb per breathing cycle. This is respectively a very important diagnostic variable for lung-related conditions, and so on and so forth.
That does make
So,
sense to me, the lung part. I'm a bit curious. Can you explain to me on a
mhm,
sciencey basis about the fat oxidation carbohydrate metabolism? How
mhm,
how does how
mhm.
can you glean that type of
How does it
information
work?
from?
Yeah, yeah, we get that question a lot, and it's actually not very intuitive, but measuring fat and carbohydrate oxidation through breath has been the gold standard long before PNoE came along. So the fundamental science is the following. We know from molecular biology that in order to burn a molecule of fat, you need a specific amount of oxygen, and that produces a specific amount of carbohydrates. And we know the same for carbohydrates. So we know at a molecular level, down to a cellular level, that the ratio of O2 and CO2
Mhm.
for burning fats and burning carbs is very, very specific. Now, all the O2 and all the CO2 that we use and produce respectively is going to come through our airways. So effectively, when we're measuring oxygen consumption and CO2 production, we are measuring the cumulative effect of oxygen consumption and CO2 production in our cells. And so by taking the average of that, we can understand what on average our cells are burning at that particular point in time. So that's kind of the science behind it.
Yeah, no, okay, let's just dive a little deeper on that. So let's just say
Hmm.
at a very particular moment, let's say I know the test
Hmm.
is runs about 10 minutes or so. So in
Hmm.
those particular 10 minutes, you can say that, hey, at this and these 10 minutes, it looks like your cells are burning this much, energy, if you want to call it, right?
Hmm.
Uh,
At a whole body level,
at a whole body level.
we
Exactly.
you are burning, say, these many calories from fats and these many calories from carbs.
And would it not depend on what is available or doesn't really matter if you're fasting state or
Oh,
whatever?
it does a lot, and that's why a very important part in conducting a metabolic test with any device
Okay.
is the protocol. So, am I testing you at a fasted state? Am I testing you in an exercise state? Am
Hmm.
I testing you in a postprandial state? And these different states will give us different insights into your health. For example, people that have very high carbohydrate consumption in a fasted state, studies have shown that are in several times higher risk of developing type 2 diabetes. the science behind that is quite complicated. We can go into that, but this is just an example of how a particular state yields a particular insight. If you're measuring substrate utilization, that's the scientific terminology we use in order to describe fat and carbohydrate oxidation during exercise, you are going to derive information along the lines of what is your body utilizing when you are exercising at that particular intensity with this particular modality. If you're measuring RER, in other words, fat and carbohydrate oxidation at a postprandial state, that is a marker of metabolic flexibility. Metabolic flexibility is our body's ability to switch between fuel sources when certain fuel sources become available. For example, I'm in a fasted state, and then I consume a specific amount of carbohydrates, and then, you know, my body's response, in other words, my body's ability to absorb carbohydrates and put them in good use, is going to be reflected in how my substrate utilization changes. So that is giving you a good idea of.
So if there's more metabolic flexibility, which I assume is good, positive thing, then one would be able to burn more carbohydrates in a postprandial state. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And also we have less tendency of storing carbohydrates and several other beneficial byproducts of a agile metabolism, as we like to call it. Yes, in other words, we want to be able to be metabolically flexible. We want to be able to quickly respond to changes in energy availability, as we call it.
So I assume as that carbohydrate metabolism requires more oxygen. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's why it has a CO2 to CO2 ratio of 1 versus 0.7, which is for the fat molecule.
Ah, okay, 0.7. So 0.7 is fat metabolism and carbohydrate.
Exactly. So that's why, you know, perhaps some of the listeners are a little bit more sophisticated. They know the RER metric that ranges between 0.7 and 1. If you measure it at a resting state, then RER of 0.7 corresponds to almost total fat oxidation across the body versus 1, which means almost complete carbohydrate metabolism at a whole body level. There is meaning for the value below 0.7 and above 1. Below 0.7 indicates ketosis, and then above 1 indicates the so-called de novo lipogenesis, which is basically producing new fat from carbohydrates. Our body has many different processes and procedures in order to do something when we are exceeding normality. And one of these processes is, how do I do something with the carbohydrates that I can't really use right now? And basically, this is storing them into fat.
That wouldn't be an ideal, that we would try to avoid. We want to normally avoid that, right? So we wouldn't want. So
exactly.
So in a general sense, when you're talking about you, and I know you, that's one of the things about your company, that they're providing these nutrition plans and advice on how to, I assume, increase metabolic flexibility. And is it to bring down that ratio? Is that what you're trying to generally do?
Well, metabolic flexibility is definitely an objective that one should pursue. And yes, like the programs that we prescribe, I wouldn't want to frame it necessarily around nutrition. Exercise is a tremendously big part of it. And metabolic flexibility is a consequence of good mitochondrial function. And probably the best driver of mitochondrial function would be zone 2 training. So when we find someone with poor fat oxidation, poor metabolic flexibility, poor metabolic profile, if you just want to summarize it somehow, then one of the most important things this person should do is zone 2 training. There are other nutritional things that you can obviously do in order to improve your metabolic health. For example, stay away from processed carbs, stay away from processed food. Fasting is a modality that works for some people. However, I would like to point out that for fasting to be effective, it truly needs to have very long durations, which most people are not able to maintain. So fasting for like 10, 12 hours don't really expect that this is going to help your cells.
It won't help this
That's
whole they phase, popularity of time restricted feeding of, fasting for, 12 to 15 to 18 hours every day is, you're saying, not
I
having much
personally
impact?
I personally do it
Yeah.
because it helps with my lifestyle. I'm fully aware that it doesn't necessarily have tremendous impact in my cellular fitness, and it may have, however, benefits in terms of managing your calories, right? You're basically skipping a meal. It may have benefits in terms of how you feel in the morning and whether you can work effectively in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
But it is very important to highlight that if you're looking to improve cellular fitness, zone 2 training is your best bet.
For our listeners, do you mind just taking people through what is zone two, as just
Yeah.
quickly?
So as I mentioned earlier, you can measure substrate utilization, i.e. fat and carbohydrate consumption in different states: resting, after consuming a meal, and during exercise. And specifically during aerobic exercise, in other words, biking, running. Now, if you conduct a VO2 max test, you will see in the charts that fat oxidation kind of peaks and then drops. And then carbohydrate oxidation is low in the beginning, and that as intensity goes up, because of the fact that our body is requested to produce more and more effort in a shorter period of time, inevitably it will switch from slower burning fuels like fat to faster burning fuels like carbohydrates. That's why you have these two lines, kind of working in separate ways. Like one is going down, the other one is going up. Now, there is one point where fat oxidation peaks.
Hmm.
And this is not the lowest possible exercise intensity. It is on the lower end, but it's not the lowest one. And it's very, very different from person to person, A, and B, it changes a lot as you change things in your life. You gain weight, you lose weight, you exercise, you become fitter, you become less fitter. This thing is going to change because it is a reflection of how fit your cells are. So we conduct a test, we identify this point. We obviously use proxy metrics in order to identify it, right? Be it heart rate, be it watts, effort exerted on a bicycle. And so you have this compass expressed in heart rate, watts, whatever, and you basically train at that intensity. Recommendation is for 45 minutes at least, ideally 1 hour, and for people who are just starting, at least 2 times a week. So this is kind of the concept of zone 2 training, is being popularized a lot by several KOLs like Peter Attia.
That's right.
More and more people are talking about zone 2 training, and it's actually for good reason. It is probably one of the most, if not the most powerful thing we can do for ourselves.
How can one know one is in zone two?
Um, I mean, obviously there have been, kind of experiential ways to try and describe what it feels like. And some trainers or fitness health professionals will tell you just run at the pace where you can maintain a conversation. Studies have shown, we have shown, has been known for decades, you can't really nail it by doing something as rough that I just described. You need to actually measure it, and measuring it is going to give you a very big bang for the buck when it comes to your training, because if you look at the fat oxidation curve around the peak, it's actually quite steep. So it
Right.
goes up and then down very,
Wow.
very abruptly. So
Mm-hmm.
you really need to be at the right intensity. And if you move the intensity window one way or the other, then you're going to miss out on a lot of fat
Wow.
oxidation that is training your cells to be more effective.
So the breath analysis could help people find that. I mean, is that
Breath analysis is the gold standard for
right?
finding that. Some people talk about um, lactate, blood lactate
Mm-hmm.
levels. Uh, Not the best way for a variety of reasons. It's not a whole body metric. It is not a direct measurement of fat and carbohydrate metabolism. It is definitely better than basing your assumption off of your conversational exercise intensity. But I really don't see the point of piercing yourself and going through this process when it's now so simple to just get on a bike, put on a mask. It's very easy to breathe in and get the gold standard measurements.
Can a resting, breath analysis provide that information of what your zone 2 is? Because I guess by
No,
extrapolating.
unfortunately not.
Okay.
No, no, no.
You have to be
Yeah. You
walking,
actually need to,
put yourself in zone 2
yeah,
and then do the test and show that you're in that.
exactly.
Yeah.
We need to scan the spectrum of intensities.
Okay.
There is no way around that.
Okay, so any type of treadmill, like progressive treadmill test,
Yeah.
will probably find where your zone 2 is.
Correct. And for our more, elaborate / sophisticated users who are maybe a little bit further along in their fitness journey and they want to be even more precise with their training, what I will tell them is that zone 2 and all of your zones are actually also dependent on the type of movement you're doing. So your body has a different response when running, different response for biking. So if you want your zone 2 for running and your zone 2 for biking, then you obviously need to do 2 separate tests. And obviously, when it comes to biking, we provide you with zones based on wattage, etc.
Right. And so now take me through why are you testing for heart rate and heart rate variability? What added information is that bringing?
Yeah, so great question. So heart rate variability is first of all used in order to provide a cardiovascular fitness score for our resting test. And as I said earlier, we're not just doing SDNN analysis, we're doing the full frequency domain analysis of heart rate variability. For our listeners to get a little bit of background on that, heart rate variability can be analyzed in terms of its frequencies. I'm just trying to very briefly summarize what frequency domain analysis is. So basically, you take the frequency domain of your heart rate variability and you chop it up in 3 sections. You have the high frequency, low frequency, and very low frequency domain of heart rate variability. Now, studies have shown that these 3 different domains provide information for different parts of your physiology, different elements of your physiology. So one thing that we do with that is we provide you with your cardiovascular fitness score. And then something very interesting that we have coming up soon is a stress and sexual wellness report that is going to leverage a lot of the breath and heart rate variability information that we get from the test. So it is a very interesting metric. We're doing a lot of work with merging information from heart rate variability and breath analysis. And there are some exciting, cool things that we have in our reporting, in our reports as well.
I had, and most people are getting heart rate variability from their Whoop or their Oura Ring. And how would you, I know you're using I think the Polar Strap, I believe, as part of the testing.
Yeah.
How would you rate these types of the quality of these numbers that are coming from some of these, wearables? Is it
well
pretty accurate?
Yeah. So obviously the Polar H10 is a lot more accurate because it's actually a direct measurement of the electrical signal of the heart. You use it during the test only because it's a chest strap. It's not very convenient to be wearing it all day long. But for the most part, both Whoop and Oura Ring are fairly accurate in providing you with an SDNN number, which is what they report. They measure it at night, but they don't really do, or they may do it, they don't necessarily report it in the user interface, the spectrum domain analysis that we conduct. And by the way, that's not some methodology that we developed. It is very well established in the literature. So if you have heart rate variability data, you can conduct this type of analysis. For example, in some work that we're doing with the Apple Watch, which is a very open system, we can get the raw data from the heart rate variability measurements your Apple Watch has taken, and we can do some of the frequency domain analysis that we are doing with the Polar H10.
Okay, so yeah, so then what you're saying is that the numbers that we're getting from the Oura Ring and Whoop, they're obviously missing some type of level of sophistication.
They're more higher level.
Yeah,
more higher level.
Right. I had an athlete, someone was relatively quite healthy, stuck stuck at a certain like number. I would, if familiar, was like 30 or 40 for him, which normally, I see most people are like 100 if they're 30 years old and general. So how would you rate like being able to compare someone's HRV from one person's HRV number to another person's HRV number? How comparable are they?
Very difficult to compare
Okay.
and contrast. Obviously, there is a spectrum. Like, having a low HRV can never be good. Like, but the thing is that the spectrum is not very granular, that we can make comparisons between very close numbers, is what I'm trying to say.
Got it.
Let me give an example. If my HRV is 40 and then yours is like 44, like, I don't know to what extent we're able to say that, yours is a lot better than mine. But if my HRV is like 19 or 10, then yes, it's pretty bad. So we know that in the SDNN spectrum, like, higher end is better, lower end is bad. But to what extent you can make more granular statements when you're looking at numbers that are closer to each other, that is obviously a lot harder. It is not like VO2 max, where it's a straight line. The higher oxygen means better health, more longevity, That actually, there's very few metrics in nature that are as lucid and explicit as VO2 max.
Well, okay, let's move on to VO2 max, because I'd like to talk about that. I know Peter Tia mentions that as well as one of the most important markers for longevity. So let's talk about that. Maybe take us through what is the VO2 max, and why is this so important? That'd be great.
Absolutely. So VO2 max is the maximum amount of oxygen your body can absorb, and it is as people have probably seen and as they can probably infer, by putting your body in a condition of stress, exercise intensity. You have the mask on, and then, as I said, one of the biomarkers we measure is your VO2 max. Why? Because we're constantly measuring your volume of oxygen consumption, and where we see this variable peaking, boom, right there, this is your VO2 max. Now, why is VO2 max such an important metric? As I mentioned earlier, breath analysis is a truly holistic assessment, if not the most holistic assessment, because it understands how 4 extremely important systems, specifically heart, lungs, blood circulation, and cells, are working individually, but also in unison. Now, these 4 systems are basically our metabolism. These 4 systems are basically what keep us alive at any given point in time. And what's also extremely important is that every major chronic condition, diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, will either manifest through some sort of impaired oxygen exchange in one of these 4 systems of the oxygen chain. So we have the oxygen chain, and at some point, this chain may start to break down. That is going to immediately be reflected in the amount of oxygen our oxygen chain can push down, and obviously the amount of CO2 it can push upwards and clear when we exhale. So VO2 max can be thought as the all-encompassing variable of this oxygen chain. So if I was to ask you, how good is your oxygen chain working? If you wanted to give me one number, obviously there are more variables that I spoke about that are more specific to each part of the oxygen chain. But if you were to give me one answer based on one variable, that would be VO2 max, because it represents the holistic efficiency of this oxygen chain. And because these 4 systems are so fundamental, they are related to every chronic condition that is killing people nowadays. It is a reflection of how healthy you are. And this is the theory of VO2 max. Now, our scientific observations of VO2 max are summarized, I would say, by the scientific statement that the American Heart Association put out in 2016, where they summarize all the findings that we have accumulated over several decades of longitudinal studies that have very explicitly stated how VO2 max is a direct, has a direct correlation with longevity, which encompasses both length of life, but also quality of life. The American Heart Association is not specifically using the term longevity, but they are using the term mortality and morbidity, which are direct equivalents of length and quality of life. So
yeah, so what
that's
would be the
why
what would be the
VO2
factors
max is
that
so important.
what could be the factors that influence your VO2 max, and how modifiable is it? So let's say someone does a test, they find out, what could we be suggesting people to how to change that? Is it changeable?
Yeah, so when someone starts to think in terms of the oxygen chain, then it becomes very clear in our minds, what can I do to improve my oxygen chain? I will either improve the heart, the
Yeah,
lungs, blood circulation, or cells.
got
That's
it.
it. At a very simplistic perspective, but for the average person in our day-to-day action, this is more than enough. And what can I do to train my heart, lungs, and cells? For the most part, exercise. Nutrition is a very, very important part as well, but exercise is, I would say, the biggest determinant. Now, what type of exercise? All kinds of exercise will have an impact on VO2 max. VO2 max training, as Peter Attia describes, is certainly one of the most powerful ones. Obviously, being able to do it and being able to exercise at high intensities, this is a different story. And that's why, if you're not a very fit person, you need to start with probably zone 2 training and some other lighter forms of exercise before you go into that. And bear in mind that what studies have shown is that the more untrained you are, the higher the impact the exercise is going to have on your VO2 max.
Yeah.
If you have a VO2 max of 30 and you want to push it up to 35, then just a little bit of exercise is enough. If you have a VO2 max of 70, which is the VO2 max of a professional triathlete, pushing it to 71, 72 is extremely difficult. It is basically Mother Nature trying to keep us behind. It's the law of diminishing returns. But for the most part, what listeners have to keep in mind is exercise is by far the biggest contributor. Now, VO2 max, and this is a segue to why nutrition is important, is expressed in terms of milliliters per minute of oxygen. This is the numerator over kilograms of body weight. This is the denominator.
Right.
You may have, this is where nutrition comes into play. So you may have a very big oxygen chain, but the million-dollar question is how big it is in proportion to your weight. Because you may present with an ability to push down 4 liters of oxygen, 4,000 milliliters per minute. But if you weigh a lot, I'm very sorry, sir, this is not a big oxygen chain.
So then one could just lose weight.
To your weight.
So losing weight would have an impact
Exactly.
increasing the VO2 max, which I never thought of that. Yeah, I thought this was just looking at lung capacity.
Losing weight is the next thing that you can do. And the way and the reason why weight loss is ultimately correlated with all of these positive outcomes, reduction in mortality, increase in length of life, reduction in diabetes, etc., is ultimately also reflected by the VO2 max equation, which very effectively summarizes this coexistence of exercise and nutrition into one's ability to live long and good. So yeah, you can reduce your weight. That is going to have an impact in increasing your VO2 max. However, what we've seen going, from very theoretical discussion into practice is that it's easier for people to start to exercise. So increasing the numerator, making your oxygen chain bigger, is a much easier first win. And then we can talk about nutrition, weight loss, etc.
Right.
Bear in mind,
go ahead.
A bigger obese person or overweight person who exercises is likely going to have a higher VO2 max compared to a normal weight individual who doesn't exercise. And that means that the first person is better off. I'm not saying that the first person is where he or she needs to be, but it's in a better trajectory.
Some just looks like just bigger people have bigger VO2 maxes. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no. I'm talking about an overweight person who exercises.
Ah, right.
Yeah, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a few minutes about high intensity interval training? Like what do you think the literature supports? Like how much, what's the frequency and length? Is it, what's
What the literature suggests is that the more exercise, the better. So and there is too much exercise can never be bad, is what I'm trying to
what
say.
about
There are
overtraining?
different types of interval training.
Right,
I think, okay, so if we're having a discussion for the average person that is
right.
interested in longevity, then, obviously we haven't gone into the realm of overtraining. Of course, you're very right. If we're oversimplifying things, we will run into these issues. And yeah, for athletes, overtraining is an issue for sure. But in terms of interval training, there are several types. The most interesting one for people interested in longevity, which is the one that focuses a lot on your VO2 max,
Mm-hmm.
is basically doing zone 4 intervals, which is basically going 4 minutes at your FTP or higher zone 4, and being able to maintain that for at least 4, maybe 5 minutes, and then doing a recovery for a few minutes, and then doing several sets of that.
Okay.
Now there are zone 5 intervals, which are shorter intervals, which is basically going all out for about a minute and then
Yeah.
doing a recovery for maybe 3 or 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
That also has an impact on VO2 max, not as significant as zone 4 intervals. And then for triathletes, for example, there are the tempo intervals, which are zone 3 intervals. These are more for training purposes. So yeah, now how much you need to be doing, how frequently, that is more of a training and programming discussion.
Got it.
And it obviously has to do with the person's lifestyle preferences and so on and so forth.
Okay, I think this is great. We're just about nearing the end of our time, but I just wanted
Mhm.
to give you an opportunity just to maybe speak about where do you think things are going with this technology? I know you did mention it. You're going to be implementing some new things with HRV. Anything else you foresee in the
Mhm.
next 12 months with these types of assessments and this technology? Go ahead.
I think, can you hear me okay now?
Yeah,
Because
I
I
can
think you
hear you.
froze
Maybe
for
it
a
got
little
cut
bit.
out. Yeah, no, I was saying anything. What do you foresee in the next 12
Yeah,
months with this technology and the science?
yeah. So, well, our main driver right now as a company, our main focus is to make the consumer experience as comprehensive as possible. And this is why we're utilizing more and more of the variables that we're already collecting in order to provide people with more insights and a better understanding of how these variables may be affecting different areas of their physiology. So we're not really, producing new hardware. We're not measuring new things. We're just making some of the variables that we are already collecting more
Mhm,
useful for the person's everyday life.
mhm,
At the end of the day, we're big believers that, it boils down to nutrition, training, and recovery.
mhm.
We don't want to overburden people with data. I think the PNoE test, as it stands today, is already a lot of data for most people. Now, our mission and quest is how do we take this data and provide a much more comprehensive experience. So we have done a lot with nutrition. We're launching training programming soon. And I think in the near future, there will also be breath work and recovery programming. We're big believers of the fact that when it comes to our physiology and our lifestyle, um, change is going to come from better nutrition, better training, and better recovery. And so our objective is to make people as intelligent and as precise when it comes to these 3 areas.
That's perfect. For our listeners who are interested in learning more or finding a provider who can get them this type of assessment, breath analysis assessment, where can they go? Can you?
If you message us on Instagram, PNoE Analytics, or visit our website, or even send us an email, we have people dedicated to hooking people up with our providers in the United States, and I believe UK. Don't
Okay.
quote me on that. I don't know if we've launched that in the UK yet, but for our US listeners, we have that for sure.
Okay, I'll make sure I put those links in the notes, and here we're in Canada, so you can obviously come here in our Toronto clinic. And
Obviously, yeah.
yeah.
My girlfriend is from Canada, so I'm a very frequent visitor. Yeah.
Awesome. And then for any
Awesome.
providers who are interested in bringing this technology into their office, they can also contact you, Panos, or the company, and I will also have a
Mhm.
little link where they can sign up, and I'll forward it to you as well. So we'll do that. That sounds good. Anything else?
Awesome. Awesome.
Mhm.
All good. Much appreciate the time and the opportunity, and I look forward to speaking again soon.
Yeah, this was very informative. I've loved the science part, and I think we may have a bunch more questions from our viewers. Let's see what happens. But I thought it was amazing. Thank
Absolutely.
you. All right, take care.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.